Hello, I'm Dr. Garrett Boyer. Welcome to Gospel Minded, where we spend a few minutes each week talking about psychology, our emotions, behavioral health, and we reflect on how these important topics are related to the gospel reading for each Sunday. Now, like always, this isn't intended to be a substitute for actually going to church or engaging in therapy or counseling or spiritual direction if you are participating in those sort of practices. But like we know so well, our psychology, things of the mind, so often go beautifully hand in hand with our spirituality. We've seen this week after week. Now, I'm glad to be back with you today, and I'm glad you're here with me. Last week, I was on vacation and didn't make a video, and that's okay. I'm going to explain why as we get going along. But here we are today, back together again, and the gospel reading this Sunday again continues from Mark's gospel. Today it's Mark chapter 6, and it begins with verse 30. This is the feeding of the 5,000, and I want to read this to you. It says, "The apostles returned to Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. And he said to them, 'Come away by yourselves to a lonely place and rest a while.' For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in the boat to a lonely place by themselves. Now many saw them going and knew them and ran there on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. As he landed, he saw a great throng, and he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things." So that was our gospel reading from today, and really fascinating, really beautiful. What I want to reflect on is that first part. So here the apostles engaged in all kinds of charitable works, preaching, teaching, spreading the message of Jesus. And it sounds like they were really pouring themselves out, going all in, which is tremendous. But what did it say? They were going so hard at the ministry, they had no leisure. They didn't even have time to eat. Wow. I want to talk today about self-care. This is something that has become more relevant, I think, in the past 15, 20 years. I think as a society and a culture, we're more attentive to the importance of taking good care of ourselves and what kind of havoc burnout can wreak in our lives, and what happens when we just have gone so hard and so far that we can't go anymore. That impacts so many aspects of our life, our functioning. It impacts our work, it impacts our relationships with others. Lots of things to be conscientious of, and I'm so glad that we're starting to get cued in, and it becomes more and more relevant all the time, how important good self-care is. Now, when we talk about self-care, especially when we think about it occupationally, there are certain career fields, certain jobs, certain ways of living that tend to be more vulnerable to stressors and burnout than others. So the research and literature suggests that people who work in the healthcare industry in any way, shape, or form tend to experience very high levels of stress and burnout. If you've ever worked in a hospital or as like an emergency provider, ambulance, that kind of thing, EMT, you know how stressful that can be. Fast-paced environment, not great pay considering the kind of work you're doing. You're working with people, which can always be challenging. So healthcare workers are very vulnerable. Educators and teachers also, according to literature, high levels of burnout. Those who work in the food industry or restaurant business. I've not done that myself, but I've known people who have, and boy, they talk about just the daily grind of being in that kind of environment. Other Other jobs are people who work in IT, information technology, people in retail or customer service, people who work in media, journalists, writers, people who work in the news. All these different people, according to research, tend to experience high levels of stress and burnout. And then I haven't seen a ton of literature about this, but I do know experientially that people who are homemakers, be they wives and mothers or husbands and fathers, people whose primary place of work is in their home, that can be very stressful too, because healthcare workers, teachers, people in the food industry, at some point, they're going to go home. If you're a homemaker, you're in your home with your family a lot, and that ability to get away looks a little bit different. You know, it's funny. Sometimes even myself, I'll go to work and see that as kind of a break from the stressors that family life sometimes puts on you. So all this to say, there are a lot of milieus and environments where people can be stressed and can get burned out. And we think about the human person from this biological, psychological, social, and spiritual perspective. These are those important domains of the human person, and all of them are vulnerable when we're feeling stressed, anxious, burnt out. Some of the research suggests that particular areas we want to be attentive to when we're trying to combat burnout are the emotional part of us, spiritual part, the intellectual part, physical, environmental, financial, occupational, and social. But I think what all those boil down to is what I had just mentioned: the biological, psychological, social, and spiritual domains of the human person. So let's talk about each of those just briefly. When I'm feeling burnt out or stressed, how does that affect me biologically? How does that affect me physiologically? Chances are I'm going to have a high level of stress and tension. I may feel physical tightness in my chest or my muscles, and that's something to be aware of if you're experiencing burnout or stress. So what are some things we can do to combat this? Progressive muscle relaxation and deep breathing exercises can be very helpful in the moment, but just generally and broadly, good nutrition, the things that we put into our body, fuel us. Are we putting things into our body that fuel us for optimal functioning? We know, according to literature and research and science, that too many kinds of unhealthy foods or junks or sodas don't ultimately leave us feeling better. In fact, it can kind of weigh us down, but we get that temporary dopamine hit, which might be good, but the long-term effect of it isn't such a great thing. So we want to put good things into our body, good nutrition, important piece of the biological approach to self-care. Exercise. Okay, the verdict is in. There is never a time that exercise is gonna hurt you. Of course, you want to be conscientious if you are dealing with some sort of illness or health condition that would prevent you from doing some forms of exercise. But the research is so clear that exercise, especially when you're feeling stressed or burned out, is only going to help you. It releases endorphins, it gets chemicals flowing neurologically, and it just does a lot to help get us out of that funk of the burnout and the stress. Prioritizing sleep. If we're burned out, chances are our sleep patterns aren't so helpful. And so making sleep a priority, trying to get 6, 7, 8 hours, whatever you're going to need to leave yourself feeling recharged and ready to go. Prioritizing sleep is an important component in fighting off burnout. So that's a biological piece that we can be attentive to. Psychologically, what can we do when we're starting to feel stress and burnout? We need to really unplug. It's so easy to come home and want to bring work with us. If we can make that good mental break and leave the things that are on our mind most of the day somewhere else and really just take time to let the mind be free of that, that'll be very helpful. You You want to challenge your mind and keep it active, but maybe do something else. Perhaps you like crossword puzzles. Maybe you like word games. Great to keep the mind engaged. Do something that you enjoy that's not related to work or the things that have been on your mind that are stressing you out. And then I like to take the time, maybe at the end of the day, maybe every couple of days, to really conscientiously think through from start to finish everything that happened throughout the course of the day. It helps us to consolidate our memories. It helps us to process everything that we experience throughout the course of the day and really just unwind and give our mind that freedom to let some of these things go and leave it somewhere else until we come at it again. Social. How do we combat burnout with our social interactions? A couple things. First of all, establishing boundaries is important. Leaving work people at work and being able to fully be attentive to those you need to be attentive to when you're needing to take that self-care time. That's important, those boundaries. At the same time, I've known too many people who, when they're stressed, just want to isolate and go away. I've known young people especially, they get a day off. Well, I'm going to sit in my room and play video games all day. It's good to be able to do things that you enjoy, but you want to be aware to do things that are going to really leave you feeling recharged and refreshed and good about yourself. Most of the time, they don't feel good about themselves if they emerge from their room after a full day of just playing video games. So I would encourage having good conversations with family members, with peers, with friends. Some level of social interaction is very good in combating stress and burnout. And then spiritually, what are we able to do spiritually to help us unwind? Prayer, meditation, reflection, contemplation, going to adoration or mass, pulling out your sacred scripture, reading the Psalms. These are all beautiful practices that we can engage in and are excellent ways to help us combat those things that stress us out or lead to burnout. It's interesting. The gospel reading today talks about the idea of the shepherd. And I think anybody working in any of these sort of industries, healthcare, teachers, food industry, retail, people who are working at home, there are a lot of parallels to be drawn between those types of work and what the shepherd does. We're responsible to others, the healthcare worker to their patients, teachers to their students, food workers and retail people are responsible to their customers. At home, we're responsible to our children. The shepherd is responsible to the sheep. We're going to be able to serve those for whom we're responsible best if we're refreshed, recharged, energized, engaged in a healthy routine of self-care. So I hope you found this helpful. I hope that you'll be able to incorporate some self-care for yourself in the coming week. I did last week. I was at home on vacation visiting my family, and I didn't do a gospel-minded video. So here I am today. I'm glad you're with me, and I hope to see you next time on Gospel Minded. I'm Dr. Garrett Boyer. Take care.